This is Marco Reus.
This is Shinji Kagawa.
This is Nuri Shahin.
Hello, this is Jadon Sancho.
And you're listening to the Yellow Wall podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 4. We're much older than that. Hello and welcome to episode 516 of the Yellow Wall Pod. I'm your host Stefan Butzko, and today we will talk about a painful 4-4 draw away to Juventus in the Champions League, a 2-0 win away to Heidenheim, and we will quickly preview Saturday's game against VfL Wolfsburg. For all that and more, joins me Lars Bäumann. Hello Lars, how are you doing?
Sunday's game against Wolfsburg, but other than that, Stefan, everything's peachy. It's Sunday. Sunday evening, 19:30 German time, and I have to work, which is obviously terrible.
Yeah, condolences.
Against Wolfsburg, nobody cares.
Well, you'll be at the game though, are you not?
Yeah, precisely. That's the point.
Yeah,
getting home at maybe midnight on a Sunday after presumably beating VfL Wolfsburg, who bring maybe 60, maybe 70 away fans. I don't know.
Yeah, but you'll have a little more space on the press stand and whatnot. That's nice. So look at the bright side. Hopefully it'll be a good game. But speaking of good games, I think for the neutral, at least the second half with 8 goals in it, definitely was a good game. Dortmund versus Juventus. However, if you're listening to this, shout out, because I'm sure to many it's still painful that Dortmund did throw away another 2-goal lead within minutes, especially if it's the last 3 minutes of a 6-minute stoppage time. Makes it all the more awful. Like I already said, if Dortmund had not given up these 2-goal leads, or 2-goal leads in Turin and in Hamburg, then they would have won every single game so far this season. Before we maybe talk about the game, Lars, and I wish Matthias was here to answer this question, but are Dortmund by now the Tottenham of the Bundesliga in terms of bottling things?
I mean, seeing as Tottenham just won a European Cup like 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, maybe that wouldn't be such a bad idea for Dortmund. But I think this talk about bottling is something for football Twitter, which we shouldn't engage in. I also don't really agree with the notion that it's so super painful to draw away to Juventus on the first match day of 8 in the Champions League phase. Like, our pain threshold as Dortmund fans is much higher than this. So to me, it's like, okay, they drew away from home to Juventus. I would have signed up for that before the game, and obviously the game itself turned out to be, I guess, a bit annoying in terms of dropping 3 leads and all, but I don't really see it as this big of an issue. And I also kind of think the reaction has been a bit overblown in terms of, I think I read somewhere that this is exactly why Dortmund will never be a top team. Well, this non-top team was in the Champions League final last year and in the quarterfinals, and gave Barcelona a good run for their money this year. So I think they can overcome this sort of thing because they have done so in the past.
The good news is that there are a lot of positives to look at from a Dortmund perspective. Obviously negatives too, but I personally felt very frustrated after that choke job. I'm not going to lie. I'm unfortunately not above these things. I was very annoyed. But that being said, Borussia Dortmund, I thought, had a good control of the game in the first half. Was it boring to watch? Maybe, but I actually like that Dortmund managed to have a lot of possession and calm the game down, control it a lot. I know Jan Koto took probably like 5 minutes off the clock just by taking his time during the throw-ins and whatnot. But Lars, when we talk about the positives, what were your takeaways really from the game? What stood out to you that Dortmund did well before we, start with the complaints?
I guess scoring 4 away goals in the Champions League is never something to scoff at, even when conceding for yourself. And most of them were well taken. like all of them actually were well taken. The first one from Adeyemi, a nice thumping finish, a nice curler from Mecha. Obviously the Couto goal, maybe Di Gregorio has to stop that, but it's still like almost a cheeky finish on the short corner. And obviously the penalty by Bensebaini was also taken well. So it's never easy to score 4 away from home, especially in the Champions League, even if, Juventus aren't the Catenaccio masters of the past. Like, there's no Andrea Barzagli and Giorgio Chiellini and Leonardo Bonucci in that defense right now, but I think Gleison Bremer is a pretty good player, and they still managed to score 4 goals. Obviously, would like for that to be enough to win the game, which I guess we will talk about a bit more in depth later on, but generally, I think I can agree with what you said about the first half. Obviously not very fun to look at, but it's nice to see Dortmund being able to control such a game. I think the expected goals numbers were out of whack because I think XG didn't account for that offside chance by Juventus where Kobel made the save, because that was the only real scoring chance from close that I can remember. And for example, the long shot by Thuram, that wasn't a scoring opportunity that gives you, I think it was something like 0.75 XG at halftime for Juventus, which I don't agree with, as long as, we consider that one chance being offside. Now, obviously, Dortmund had like 0.04 or whatever XG, but still, like, away from home in the Champions League, even a goalless draw isn't a bad result. So them being able to control the game was nice to see. And then obviously in the second half, they turned up the screws a little bit. And that's when the game turned too wild. And I mean, obviously the mistakes by Bensebaini before the third goal they conceded. And I don't want to necessarily call it a mistake by Couto because he lost the ball, but it was so far up the pitch and they had so much time to get organized again. But still, it happened. That were obviously the main negatives. But as I said before, I don't really have too much of an issue with the performance itself. The only thing that gives me a little bit of worry is some sort of trend. They have played 30 games under Niko Kovac. They've kept a clean sheet in 11 of them, which is a decent return, I would say. But they've conceded now 4 twice against Barcelona and Juventus. Obviously, those are good sides, but they also conceded 3 against Mamelodi Sundowns, Real Madrid, and St. Pauli. So when they concede, they tend to concede in droves, and that is obviously a bit of an issue.
Yeah, very unsettling. Yeah, I mean, currently, this backline is very makeshift. I mean, when we talk about even the first goal that Juventus scored, I mean, a beautiful strike from Yildiz, but nevertheless, I think Riasson or Couto could put a little bit more pressure on him, because when the pass was squared to Yildiz, Dortmund were basically, like, they had a lot of bodies behind the ball, but they were all on one line, more or less, and didn't really get any pressure on the shooter. And if you let someone like Yildiz and someone of that quality just ample time and space, then they will punish you, and that's exactly what happens in the Champions League. So yeah, I mean, young Couto and Riasson are not center backs, but they're still defenders, and I think that as a defender in general, especially if you play right back in the back four, you still should be able to make that move and put pressure on him. So that was annoying. And obviously the second goal Juventus scored, Dortmund's backline was also unlocked with one forward pass, because I'm not entirely sure what Waldemar Anton was doing, whether he was trying to put Vlahovic offside, but he was just caught in a very weird position. Obviously, Dortmund should not lose the ball in the middle of the park the way they did, but that does not excuse the poor positioning. And yeah, the third goal Dortmund conceded was really stupid. I mean, Bensebaini just has to clear it differently. I think everyone knows that. And yeah, could Julian Brandt maybe offer a little bit more of a passing route by his own positioning? Yes, but I think this is not the position where you either gamble on trying to get a throw in or try to pass it, because it really took 1 or 2 seconds for the ball to be in the net. And yeah, Riasson in that moment also can't really do much against Vlahovic, to be honest, because A, things went really quickly, and B, just was on the wrong side of the defender. Yeah, maybe a true center back would have defended both the last two goals a little bit better, but it's just annoying the way that Dortmund gave it away in the end. I mean, the fourth goal is really the most annoying one to me personally, because, as you said, Dortmund should have just buried the ball at the opponent's corner flag for 20 or so more seconds and maybe one throw, and then this game would have been over. But unfortunately, Vlahovic was in absolute beast mode and super motivated and made all the runs that Dortmund didn't. I know on Twitter, people pointed to Julian Brandt and his lack of effort, but in general, Dortmund just got really stretched in that situation. It's not like Svensson did really well to defend that situation either. Waldemar Anton came out to sort of defend Vlahovic, but he also was too late and was then caught in no man's land. Just a lot of mistakes the entire play, where Dortmund were very upfront but did not have the cohesiveness or cohesion because they were just so stretched apart and no one got even close to Vlahovic or anyone in that matter. It just felt a bit like almost a situation from like a training routine where defenders are instructed to not harm anyone. So yeah, I think the late game defense and the way Dortmund closes out games or in the last 10-ish minutes of the game is something that definitely needs to be addressed. But that being said, after Dortmund took the initial lead in the 86th minute, sorry, not the initial lead, but when they scored the second, you often see Dortmund then drop back and just defend a deep block. But I actually appreciated at the time that they were still very aggressive and that they still tried to push for maybe a third or just put Juve under pressure and keep them away from their own danger zone. So I think in general there are a lot of positives of how Dortmund behaved, how Dortmund responded to Juventus's goals, because the momentum shifted a couple of times in this game. And, Karim Adeyemi did not have many smiles left when he held up the Man of the Match award. But in my view, and maybe you could share it with Vlahovic, but in my view, it was definitely from a Dortmund perspective deserved, because he obviously scored the first. He did set up the second for Mecha, which was a very nicely weighted ball that Mecha could pounce on. And then his very long pass to Julian Brandt also set up the penalty eventually. So I thought that he overall played a very complete game. He was, diligently defending when need be. I thought that he made a lot of good and positive runs for the team. So, no, he didn't just score, but he also put in the work, put in the shift. I think people can criticize him for not always doing it similarly in the Bundesliga, but I think he's getting there. And I just wanted to point out that I'm very happy with this version of Karim Adeyemi. Lars, how do you see that?
I think I would actually say that Gregor Kobel was the best player on the pitch. Obviously, it's difficult to give a goalkeeper the Man of the Match award. I mean, they rarely do it anyways, and obviously when he concedes 4, that is perhaps not the best optics, but both the save against Thuram, which was deflected, and I don't even remember the one in the second half, might have been Yildiz, the one that was driven low towards the left, when looking at the goal from the front, so to speak, which Kobel turned onto the post. Like, both those saves were ones that were even hard to appreciate live, because it wasn't obvious immediately whether he even got his fingertips to it, because he was so outstretched. And like, those were big boy saves. And to me, it seems like Gregor Kobel plays his best in the Champions League. He sometimes gets, I don't know if it's like complacency or whatever in the Bundesliga, but to me, it just looks like he turns it up quite a bit when it's the Champions League. I mean, he was the best goalkeeper in the Champions League during Dortmund's run to the final against Real Madrid. And I don't know, it's just sort of an observation from me. But in terms of Adeyemi, I definitely agree. I think he's, I don't know, over-hated, if that's a word, outside of like internet bubbles, which I'm too old for. Because obviously he sometimes looks like he doesn't give, full effort, and he smiles a bit too much on the pitch, maybe not when receiving the Man of the Match award, according to you, Stefan.
I only saw the picture. Maybe he was smiling in between that picture. Who knows?
Yeah, I think he, just from his personality, he sometimes doesn't really look like he's, locked in completely, but I think you should always judge players based on their performances, and I have absolutely no problem with basically anything Karim Adeyemi has done in terms of, when he concentrates on football ever since Niko Kovac has taken over. Maybe I'm overlooking something, but the only criticism I would levy at him is that sometimes he still gets taken out of the game by provocations too easily. I mean, we're going to be talking about the Heidenheim game a bit later on, but there was definitely a phase during that game where Adeyemi was closer to a second booking than, having a positive impact on the game for Dortmund. And that sort of thing tends to happen to him a bit too often still. But other than that, I think his development under Kovac is definitely one of the bigger positives.
Yeah, I would agree. I think also the setup of Bayer, Adeyemi, and Guirassy is not the worst. I think this, with a little bit more time, it could gel. Obviously, with Julian Brandt probably rotating back in, we will not see this lineup much more often. But I think for a Champions League night like this, it helps. Bayer didn't do as many things, but he still was, very intricate in, or very, very important in some, tracking backs and these kind of things where he won possession. And I thought, in terms of Dortmund keeping control of the game, I think Bayer actually did play a crucial part here and there. So there's that. Other than that, I think, Svensson right now, I think maybe needs a breather. He is not playing at the level he's played before. And the backline is the backline, but that is maybe also not going to change anytime soon. I also don't know if I would have picked Mané over Riasson. Maybe, in an ideal world you do that, but, Mané was also not in exactly, showed the kind of effort or performance in St. Pauli where you then trust him to play against Juventus in the Champions League. So I can understand Niko Kovac if he sides with a bit more experience there. And other than that, the Mecha Sabitzer double pivot, not my favorite, but I think it was decent. Especially in the first half, I would have really loved for either of those two to create more of a connection to the front three, because I thought they just played the ball back to their back line too many times, and even when they were not under pressure, not often enough, I thought, turn around on the ball. But I thought out of possession they were decent. I mean, Sabitzer did win possession, I think, was it before Kuto's goal, very high up the field. I don't have too many complaints. I think overall, apart from the frustration of the goal conceded, Dortmund can be happy with the point, as you said. And I think there's no doubt, well, there's always a little doubt, but I'm relatively comfortable that they will finish among the first 24, I think it is, and then have the one extra round. I don't know if Dortmund will manage the top 8, but we all would have signed up for points away to Juventus first. So obviously it's 2 points dropped now, but there are, however, still a couple of talking points we might want to discuss. One of them is, of course, the penalty, because there was a very long VAR check, and I think it was pretty clear from the images that Benzebaini was the designated shooter, but Guirassy then wanted to take the penalty himself, and there was a bit of discussion, let's say. Lars, is this something that's going to have longer repercussions, be it that Guirassy might be unhappy as the world-class striker that we have? Does he need to be a better teammate in these situations? How do you see this whole thing, or is it just negligible drama?
I guess we'll see. Like, the next penalty will definitely be looked upon quite closely, I suppose. I can understand that Guirassy, and it's obviously a positive quality in strikers, always wanting to score. And, I think Niko Kovac actually explained it with Guirassy's shot having been blocked by Lord Kelly with his hand. And that's why Guirassy thought he was maybe in the right to demand taking it. But obviously when the head coach ahead of the game designates a penalty taker, that is something that needs to be taken into account. And I can't really remember if it was on this podcast or maybe in like a written piece or whatever, but I have clamored for Ben Sebaini to get penalties for months because he is an excellent penalty taker, as evidenced by his putting it away against Juventus, and also his career at Borussia Mönchengladbach. He, for example, scored a winner in a match against Bayern against Manuel Neuer in stoppage time from the penalty spot. If memory serves, I think the record shows now 11 out of 11, so he's never missed a penalty in his professional career. Between him and Emre Can, whenever he returns, they have 2 penalty takers who, until proven otherwise, should be ahead of Guirassy in the pecking order. Obviously, when Dortmund are ahead by 3 goals against whomever, then maybe you say, okay, our striker wants to score goals and wants to maybe win the Torschützenkanone in the Bundesliga or whatever, so he gets to take the penalty, which doesn't really matter. But this one against Juventus obviously did matter. So, tough luck, Guirassy. Be a man about it and suck it up. Like, he didn't have a great game and he wanted his scoring streak to continue, which again is always a positive thing in a striker. But when the head coach makes a decision before the game, you have to respect it no matter who you are.
Yeah, I think that's a very sensible take. Guirassy, had a really good chance to continue scoring streak, but did not put it away, even though I would assume that Guirassy from that position would, have a little bit better aim than the goalkeeper's shoulder, to be honest. But it's always easier said than done, to be honest, in these kind of situations. But the ball was just perfectly in front of him, not much pace, and, you just need to place it a little bit better. It was a bit lucky that the ball even got to Guirassy in that moment. So that's a little bit annoying. I hope the shirt mishap where Guirassy was wearing a shirt that said Dortmund is not adding to his frustrations, and he's not the what we call it, the insulted liverwurst, to literally translate a German saying. But yeah, I guess we'll just observe that. In the meantime, I think we can be just happy that Dortmund qualified for the Champions League again, that we even get these magical nights, even if it's a little bit painful in the end. But overall, I think this was the biggest test of this season so far, to see where Dortmund are at, sort of what level they are. And I think it's fair to say, while Juventus are not absolute world beaters right now, I think that's pretty clear. You can at least say that Dortmund are a competitive team right now, and if they're not bungle things at the very end, they should be okay going forward. That's sort of my main takeaway, is that my worry level and concern level about this team, even with all the injuries they currently have, especially in the back line, is still very moderate. I don't know, Lars, if you have any counterpoints to make and reasons why your or our concern levels should be high or heightened. But for the start of the season, where a lot of things still have to, just come together and gel, so far I'm content.
Yeah, you should be. I mean, they haven't lost a game since obviously Real Madrid in the Club World Cup, but before then I think Barcelona, the first leg. So
yes,
that's quite a long while now, and obviously they haven't necessarily played a murderous draw of opponents, but it's never easy to go unbeaten for months on end, because shit happens, and obviously shit has happened to Dortmund when they were ahead. So maybe that is a positive kind of viewpoint on those things, but I mostly agree with you. I think there is and we've talked about this before, there's a level of baseline competence under Niko Kovac where I don't know how high the ceiling is, but I don't really worry about them, completely wetting the bed. So every time you say fall apart, Stefan, I kind of wince, not only because I would say autumn, but you are in America, so obviously you can say fall because the leaves fall down, I suppose. But also because I mean, obviously, if push came to shove and there was another massive injury crisis, then maybe that is what you mean by fall apart fall, but it's not like I expect them to just completely nosedive in terms of performances and results, because that's just not really how Niko Kovac operates when he has a decent squad at his disposal.
Well, I mean, they did already fall apart twice. I mean, the games against St. Pauli and against Juventus, there's a certain level of falling apartage.
But if you fall apart without losing games, I think you're still in pretty good shape.
Yeah, that is true. But nevertheless, giving up these 2 goals in stoppage time is going to leave a little bit of a mark somewhere, I'm sure. But anyway, let's move on real quick. Heidenheim, obviously not the most interesting game. I think Heidenheim were pretty early taken out of the game just by injury to their own defender and then the red card. And Heidenheim's overall quality right now also does not allow them to really give Dortmund a good run for their money. Heidenheim, were sitting deep for most of the game, and I think the goals that Dortmund scored, they did create nicely. I mean, it was a half-field cross from Riasson to find Girassi, who took a really excellent header, and then of course another nice Riasson pass to Adeyemi, who cooked his opponent with the first touch. And we can talk about the provocations in a second, but it was very nice to see for Adeyemi to just square the ball off to Bayer for a simple tap in the second half. Is it sad that Dortmund didn't pile on? Because I think goal difference can always make a difference at the end of the season, as we're painfully aware of that. Or also help Dortmund qualify for the Champions League. But that being said, I think that was still a very nice win on the road. And Maxi Bayer after the game said that these are the kind of games you have to win if you want to play for the Champions League. And then Niko Kovac said, I don't know what he was drinking at halftime or if he's still too hyped after the win. But in so many words said that he will try to get these kind of thoughts out of Maxi Bayer's brain and, highlighted that Dortmund were 25 points behind Bayern Munich last season and 13 points off Leverkusen. Lars, where are you in that? Sort of what's your position, if you have one, in that whole I want to call it debate, but are you more Team Bayer or are you more Team Kovac? Do you want this team to formulate their ambitions publicly, or do you want them to bake smaller buns, as we say?
Well, first of all, you bungled the quote from Bayer, because he didn't say when you want to play for the Champions League, which is obviously their ambition, but for the championship, as in being crowned German champions.
Oh, did I say Champions League? Well, apologies.
Yeah, which obviously made no sense. For listeners who don't know the quote, it was about Bayer talking about Dortmund wanting to become champions, which is a bit of a different thing.
Yes.
I mean, I can understand a player, especially shortly after the game, being, I wouldn't say euphoric, because it wasn't the kind of game which gets you into that sort of mental state, because basically the second half was just cruise control from Dortmund, don't concede, and you don't have to expend too much energy. But I also think the reaction, especially on Twitter, which it's basically my fault for still looking at what people are writing there, because obviously there's no nuance and no context, but people were calling Kovac names and saying, oh, it's so bad that he curtails the ambition of a young player and yada, yada, yada. Kovac said it with a twinkle in his eye. He was making a joke, basically. It wasn't, Maximilian Bayer, you better shut up. We don't talk about that here. It was haha, I don't know what he was smoking, basically. So it wasn't serious from either part. And that is why the entire thing is one of those typical modern day debates, which I try to avoid, because it's just unserious business. If it were serious, I would probably lean towards Kovac, because until they prove to me or the public that they are a real force to be reckoned with in those terms, as in competing with Bayern, which I think is completely out of the realm of possibility this season. Until then, I think it'd be better served to, eat a little bit of humble pie, I suppose, to translate our bun metaphor.
Yes. I think overall, or in general, the ambition of Borussia Dortmund should be to compete for the championship. But, the current state of this team and the underachieving of this team for years now, I don't know if it allows them to really make big proclamations. It's difficult, but I also want my players to definitely have the ambition to play for titles. I want players that when they sign for Dortmund to also have that ambition, and oftentimes they formulate those ambitions, and it's something that I'm a little bit torn on in what kind of way the communication should be shaped. But if it helps for players to play better, if they say fighting for the championship is something that we're all here to do, and then I'm honestly all for it, but I'm not a sports psychologist. I'm not entirely sure how much that helps versus how much it harms, either way, from what Bayer said or Kovac said. But certainly something that is maybe blown out of proportion. I don't know. But either way, I think what we can say is about the Heidenheim game, it was a very good cameo from Chukwuemeka. I thought he played, on a level you would expect. He really just glided past a lot of opponents almost effortlessly. Was also very engaged in winning the ball back. I was almost hoping when Kovac made the final substitution at Juventus to just bring on Chukwuemeka, because I feel like Pascal Gross, with his limited range of athleticism, let's call it that, might not be the help if you just need to stop a sprint or so in the clutch. And so Chukwuemeka, I thought, looked pretty good. I mean, I don't know if you want to call him our star signing now, or if that's still Joe Bellingham, but also together with Bellingham, I thought Dortmund had some really nice combinations up front. And they did reaffirm that, if you will, against Juventus, because I thought once Dortmund entered the final third, the combination play, the short, intricate passes in and around the back line, I thought, or among the back line rather, were pretty good. And you also saw that against Heidenheim. It's obviously not easy to break a team like that down if they're positioned with pretty much all 10 players available at that moment in or around their own box. But still, I thought Dortmund had some decent chances, but I also understood that they weren't trying to run up the score to like 5, 6, 7 with the Champions League game in mind, and fall in mind too, knowing that they need to be aware of the energy level spent. So I'm very content with that game as well. And now I hope Dortmund continue where they left off. I mean, they're currently in second place in the table with 7 points along Cologne and St. Pauli. And VfL Wolfsburg, usually a well-liked opponent, especially at the Westfalenstadion. So, correction from my introduction, Sunday, 7:30 p.m. local time is the kickoff. Lars, are you expecting any big changes to Dortmund's lineup or any other storylines coming out of that game?
I think this is probably the first time you really think about rotating the squad quite a bit, because it's the first Englische Woche of the season, and obviously 2 away games to start this kind of week is a bit more of a challenge than having 2 home games, for example. So I expect there to be a little bit of turnover in the squad. Maybe even someone like Couto getting a break, because he's played basically every game, with Riasson first being out and then being needed at center half. I don't know if we can say the same about Svensson, who probably needs a break more than anyone else, because he hasn't had one since, I don't know, April or so. but they don't really have a left-sided center half right now other than Ben Sebaini, so it's not the same as on the right side, where I'm presuming Anselmino will come in and then Riasson can play for Couto. Other than that, obviously, sort of one big talking point that we've thankfully avoided so far is like the Bellingham debate, if we want to call it that. And given that I don't really have much time left, we are not going to get into that too much, but basically German media, some of my colleagues, I should say, are trying to perhaps stir something up or, make a story about Joe Bellingham, whose impact so far has certainly been limited and who hasn't really featured in the starting 11 too much. So in central midfield, there's just so much or so many options for Kovac. So I'm assuming Sabitzer is going to stay in the team because he's kind of the designated ball winner, most defensive-minded defensive midfielder at this point. But besides him, you can have Mecha for a bit of everything, Groß for, the strategic impact. Bellingham has the physicality. Maybe Chukwuemeka plays a part at some point soon for the starting 11 because, he has those wow moments where he can basically decide a game with one sort of action, which most of the other players don't have. So there's always the opportunity to mix and match there. You already mentioned earlier in the show, Julian Brandt presumably coming back in. I concur with that because Bayer, Adeyemi, and Guirassy have now started a few games in a row together, and usually you'd like to have one of those guys fresh off the bench. Obviously, more Adeyemi and Bayer and less so Guirassy, especially as long as Fabio Silva isn't available for selection. So I think there are a lot of opportunities. And the press conference is on Friday, so a few hours after this show will go online. So we don't really have a clue whether there are any new injuries or small problems that were picked up in Turin, but presumably not the case because he might have heard about it now. So I think Niko Kovac probably has quite a bit of leeway in terms of what he wants, and given their great run against Wolfsburg, whom they've lost to once in the last 20 games and haven't lost to at home since 2012 and have only conceded twice to at home in the last 10 games. And yes, I looked it up today. I think it's probably going to be somewhat smooth sailing, given that it's a home game.
Yeah, let's hope so. I'm really hoping that Anselmino will be available because I'm hoping that Riasson is not going to play right center back anytime soon again for reasons previously mentioned. So there's that. But like you said, as we don't know exactly who's going to be available, and with Dortmund you never 100% know until kickoff. I am also a little bit limited in previewing this game, and Wolfsburg are they're in 8th right now. They beat Heidenheim, they drew in Mainz, and then they had a very wild game against Cologne, especially also in stoppage time. Also not entirely sure what this Wolfsburg team is made of as of right now. It's also still much in the wait and see stage. But anyway, thank you, Lars, for coming on. Everyone else out there, thank you for listening. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Yellow Wall, and listen to the show there or ask questions in the comment section. And we will be back next week after the Wolfsburg game. Until then, have a great weekend and goodbye.